Hi, I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation, and welcome back to the Hive. In this episode of the Getting Started series, we're going to explore presence detection. We'll talk about what presence detection means, different ways to detect presence, and what we can do with presence detection. So let's get started. So first of all, what do I mean when I talk about presence detection? Well, I tell you what I don't mean is shaking the gifts under the Christmas tree to try and guess what your mum got you this year. In the context of Home Assistant, presence detection is any number of methods to determine where in the world the occupants of your home are, and then using that information as triggers or conditions for automations in your Home Assistant instance. As an example of a trigger, if you have presence detection set up and a zone defining your work location, you can set up an automation that triggers when you leave the work zone to turn on your lights if it's after dark, or even set a smart thermostat to the right temperature, or push a notification to your partner's phone to ask them if they need you to stop at the shops for milk on the way home. You can also use presence detection values as conditions in automations. An example of this might be having an automation to turn the lights on in the morning to help you wake up, a little bit like a sunrise alarm clock, but including the condition that you need to be home for that action to take place. There's a number of ways that we can perform presence detection, but all of them do rely on a device which is always with you. More often than not, the best choice here is to use your smartphone. One way you can do this is to have Home Assistant hook into your network router to monitor when a device connects or disconnects from the network. This can work pretty well, but it does have some implications for devices like smartphones, which can often go into a deep sleep when the screen is off, and if they're in that deep sleep, sometimes they might not appear on the network. Home Assistant Core has built-in integrations for many brands of network router, and you should definitely check out the integrations page of the Home Assistant website to see if your router brand is included. And I'll take a look at one of these methods, the Ubiquiti UniFi Integration, a little later on in this video. If your router's not supported by one of those integrations, another option is using the Nmap tracker. The Nmap tracker is a pretty simple tracker that just performs a fast scan of your network to determine which devices are online, and it won't detect those phones that are in that deep sleep mode, but it might be enough to trigger an automation when you arrive home. Another alternative is using the ping tracker, which pings devices, and it'll come up in a true state if they're detected on the network and a false state if that ping fails. In the case of smartphones, this could potentially increase your battery drainage if they're responding to pings all the time. So use those alternative methods with caution. Another thing that you could do is track Bluetooth devices, and this works especially well if you're running Home Assistant on a Raspberry Pi 3 or 4, which have built-in Bluetooth. Because every Bluetooth interface has a media access control or MAC address, like Wi-Fi and Ethernet interfaces, we can use these unique IDs to track when phones enter or leave the Bluetooth range of the Raspberry Pi. Bluetooth does have a smaller range than most Wi-Fi networks, so it's worth taking that into consideration. If you've got a big house and the Raspberry Pi is all the way at the back, you might find that you're not detected properly when you're standing at the front door. The last method I'll talk about, although there's many more, is using GPS. If you're using a modern smartphone, which I'm going to assume that you are if you're watching a video about smart homes, your phone likely has GPS built in. And there's a couple of different apps that we can install on the phone to make use of this GPS data. We spoke about the Home Assistant app in video 8 about setting up the mobile apps, and there's an Android version of that video in the pipeline. And the Home Assistant app adds some entities to our Home Assistant instance, including location data. There's other apps that we can use to push the GPS data to Home Assistant as well. Own Tracks and the Android fork Next Tracks seem to be popular, free, open source apps that you can install on your device and push the location data to Home Assistant directly utilizing webhooks. Your Home Assistant instance does need to be exposed to the internet in order for webhooks to work, but if you followed my DuckDNS video or my Home Assistant cloud video, both of those linked in the description below, you've already got that part under control. So that's some of the ways that we can perform presence detection. Now let's take a look at how we set up a device tracker or two, and it might be worth considering multiple methods of device tracking such as Bluetooth, GPS, and network in order to have reliable data for when a person is home or away. For now, let's head over to Home Assistant and we'll set up my Ubiquiti UniFi integration. So after we've logged into Home Assistant, now using our multi-factor authentication, thanks to that previously mentioned DuckDNS episode, we'll take a look at the configuration menu and then integrations. We're going to hit the plus button down in the bottom right hand corner and search for UniFi. Now, if you're following along at home, you likely won't see this UniFi Protect item in here because I installed that add-on using hacks in a previous video. I'm planning to upgrade my CCTV controller in the not too distant future, and when that happens, I'll be filming to bring you along for the ride, and we'll actually take a look at utilizing this UniFi Protect integration to pull camera feeds into Home Assistant again. But I digress. We'll click on Ubiquiti UniFi and you'll see that it's a pretty simple configuration once it's finished installing. All we need is the host name, the username, the password, the port number, and whether or not we're going to verify the SSL certificate. Now I've got my UniFi controller running in a Docker container on my Docker host, much like the UniFi video controller video. More on Docker in a future video, but you can run the UniFi controller on your Home Assistant Raspberry Pi if you're so inclined, just bearing in mind that it could cause some issues if you're also making use of MQTT, which we'll also be looking at in a video coming soon. Before we enter the username and password in here, I'm going to create a new user and name and password in the UniFi controller, and so we'll pop over to the UniFi controller to do that. Now I've already logged into my UniFi controller here, and I'm going to go down to settings in the left hand side, and I'm going to click on admins. I want to add a new admin and manually set and share the password. I'm going to give the new admin a name of Home Assistant, and I'm going to create a secure password because this is my production environment. I'm going to uncheck require the user to change their password. I'm not going to worry about an email, and I'm going to set this user as an administrator, and we won't worry about ticking these boxes here, and we'll click create on that now. So I'll pop back over to Home Assistant, and I'm going to enter the host, which is the IP address of my Docker host, the username of Home Assistant, and the secure password that I created before. We'll leave the port at 8443 and we'll leave the verify SSL certificate unchecked. Okay, so we now have success. We've created the configuration and it's found the following devices, and we can assign these devices to different areas in our home. We're not going to do that right now because this is all of the devices detected by this device tracker. So we'll just click finish, and now you'll see that we've got this Ubiquiti UniFi section here. So click on this 44 devices link here, and we'll see all of the devices that Home Assistant is now aware of because of this Ubiquiti UniFi integration. So we can scroll through this device list or search for a particular device name, and I'm going to search for my iPhone, and we can drill into there to take a closer look. Now, this doesn't really give us too much information because we can't really allocate this to another user. But what we can do is take a look at the entity details, and I'm going to copy this entity ID, and I'm going to now assign that entity ID to my person entity. So I'll go to the configuration menu and we'll scroll down, and I want to click on people, and then I'm going to click on me in here. What we're going to focus on is the bottom section, which is the select the devices but that belong to this person section. What I'm going to do is paste in that entity ID that I copied a moment ago. So device underscore tracker, Stewie's iPhone. So we'll click that, and I'm going to click update. So now that I've done that, Home Assistant knows that the person entity and the device tracker entity are linked. So heading back over to the dashboard, and you'll see that my face is here. This is the badge for my person entity, and if I click on that badge with my emoji on there, we should see that it's listed as being home, and it's based on the source of device underscore tracker, Stewie's iPhone. Okay, great. So now what do we do with this information? Well, let's head back to the config menu, and we'll take a look at some automations that we created in a previous video on how they use presence detection either as a trigger or as a condition. So we'll head to the automations tab, and firstly we'll take a look at this lights on when I get home automation, and we'll drill in here. I might make that screen a bit bigger so we can see. And if we scroll down to look closer at the triggers, so the trigger here is the state trigger type of person.stewart, changing from the state of away to the state of home. And when that trigger occurs, these conditions are validated, and then the actions can occur if the conditions validate. Secondly, if we pop back out to automations and take a look at this porch light on automation that I've created. So in this automation, our trigger is not anything to do with presence detection, but our condition is to do with presence detection. So in this case, when the trigger occurs 15 minutes before sunset every day, the condition becomes that person.stewart needs to be in the home zone. And that brings me to the last part of presence detection that I want to talk about, and that's zones. If we head back to our configuration menu and then scroll down and click on zones, we can use this page to create multiple zones on the map so that our presence detection is extended. Now, any zone outside of your home zone can only really be triggered by a GPS-based presence detection method, such as the Home Assistant mobile app, own tracks, or one of the many other GPS-based. This means that we can set up a zone for work, a zone for home, a zone for the kids' school, a zone for the gym, a zone for the in-laws' house, and the list goes on. And then, if we've set up these zones and we're using GPS device trackers, we can trigger or condition automations based on those zones, such as when I exit the work zone after a certain time of the day and the outside temperature is below 10 degrees, nobody else is at home and the inside temperature is below another threshold, we can set the thermostat to 20 degrees so I don't come home to a freezing cold house. Another example might be if you've got kids, you could set up an automation that sends a notification to your phone when they leave school, and another when they get home from school, so you have some peace of mind about the whereabouts of your kids. The last example I'll give with presence detection is something I'll cover more in a future video, and that is one that I use all the time, and I don't even have to think about it anymore. And that's arming and disarming the alarm system automatically based on presence. So if I'm the last person to leave the house, the alarm system will automatically arm itself in away mode. And if I'm the first person to get home, the alarm will automatically disarm itself. It works so well that I actually forgot that it was a thing until I was preparing the video for this script. So that's my take on presence detection in Home Assistant. I do hope that this video has been helpful for your home automation journey. And tell me in the comment section down below how you plan to use presence detection in your home automation setup. And if you ask really nicely, I might even do another deep dive video on some of the other presence detection methods, maybe Bluetooth, Nmap, or some of the other GPS options. Obviously, I won't be able to deep dive many of the other network methods because I don't have all those router types, but I do recommend referring to the documentation on the Home Assistant website if you need help. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Stu from Hive Mind Automation, and I'll see you next time.